It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today we'll be looking back at our 2-1 defeat against Manchester City. What a result for Fulham. We didn't get thrashed by the champions in waiting. In all seriousness, though, it was a good performance against Pep Guardiola's machine. Carlos Vinicius scored. We didn't disgrace ourselves. Look, that goal from Alvarez is just sensational and there's no stopping it. And maybe had the referee just been a little bit more veering towards the home side, just maybe we could have got a point yesterday. We'll also look ahead in this podcast to Wednesday's game at Anfield against Liverpool. If Spurs can score 3 there, then maybe Fulham have a chance. Here to dissect everything from yesterday's game, plus answer a stack full of your brilliant questions, is Dan Cook. Hello.
Hello, Sammy.
Jack Stroudy, hello.
Hello, mate.
And he's taken an hour off baby duty. Adam Carson, hello.
Hello, Sammy. Great to be back.
Are you speaking hush because the baby's asleep next door, or is that just generally?
No, she's out of the house, and as exciting as it is to have brought another little cottage into the world, I decided to send her out whilst Fulhamish was recording.
Okay, with another adult or just by herself?
Yes, yeah, no, she's not sitting outside the front door. She has gone with her mum for a walk.
Okay, good to know. Adam, would you mind doing some 3-word reviews from yesterday's game?
Absolutely. So I'll kick off with Ormond Droid's VAR applied regulations. Brian Chapman with Alvarez breaks dream with Ream in brackets. He really did. And when I remember watching the World Cup last December, I really should have known that when I was so excited for him to break out of Haaland's shadow, that it would come back to bite me in a sunny April day. We've got John Foster with sticks and stones. And whilst, stones didn't break us, Alvarez and Akanji did. And whilst words didn't hurt us, they really hurt Jack Grealish from the Johnny Haynes stand, which was very enjoyable. And then there was a lot of mentions of proud in the 3-word reviews, but I think this one was the perfect 3-word review, which has made Lisa proud in memory of lifelong Fulham fan Lisa Hughes, who sadly passed away last week.
Yes, and a reminder to us all that there are things more important in life than football, and that was a wonderful applause in the 46th minute for Lisa, and all of our thoughts with Lisa's friends and family at what is no doubt a really, really awful time, but hopefully that minute's applause just made things a little bit easier and was a lovely, beautifully respected minute by both sets of fans. Actually, credit to the Man City fans as well for joining in that beautiful minute during yesterday's game. Right, let's get into the action then, Dan. And it was just so weird walking out the Hammersmith end yesterday. It was almost like we'd won the game or drawn the game. People were kind of singing and smiling and coming out the Hammersmith end, and we'd lost a game. I can't remember a time that's ever happened, Dan, but that is the state of the game these days, where a narrow 2-1 defeat against City, we'd have all probably taken that before the game, because we were all fearing the worst. 4 or 5-0. Fulham were 11-1 to win yesterday, like we were some sort of non-league team in the 4th round of the Cup. And yeah, I think we probably would have taken that, a narrow loss and a good performance, considering the juggernaut that is Manchester City right now.
Yeah, I think it's symptomatic of a couple of things in this league. One, where we are in the league, which is, we're doing well comparatively to what we expected this season. And so we can afford to, it's not like we were, if you go back 2 years and we desperately needed wins from everywhere and suddenly you need to do what Leeds need to do next week, which is miraculously get a point off City. But also it's one of these things where going into the game, I struggle not to get pissed off, because you play against Man City and you're like, well, it's almost pointless. There almost feels like there is no point, and fundamentally should a league like the Premier League have that much disparity in it? Probably not. But, we've got a lot of credit in the bank, and we got a lot of credit from a lot of outlets as well, which is always nice, especially as, we've been in that bad run of form, and a lot of it in the run up was talking about how we haven't beaten City in 30, we've lost our last 13, I think it is, against City, which, as you would expect, because they have a lot more money and much better players than we do, and they always have over those past, 15 years. But also that we're just in bad form in general. So it's, there's a lot of positives to come out of it. And I think Marco Silva deserves credit as well. I think we'll touch on it, but he did change things tactically to try and negate City's threat, particularly Stones and Rodri in the middle of the park. I thought it was interesting how Bobby De Cordova-Reid and Harry Wilson were basically tasked with almost man marking them off out wide. They tucked in really narrow. And Silva deserved a lot of credit because we were pretty solid for most of that game, barring a couple of moments, where Bernd Leno took us, kept us in that game with as good as he's been all season. He just kept going and he pulled off a couple of wonder saves, I thought.
Yeah, Jack, it's such a shame, really. We look at the 2 games against City this season. We've only lost them 2-1 both games, and both games could easily have been draws for Fulham, maybe even more in that game at the Etihad. So you will look holistically back at this season, and I think that's indicative of the quality that Fulham have had. Look, people will point to our XG and that we should be lower down the table and we've more points than we expected, but we've gone into games like yesterday and we've been hugely competitive against the best team in this league. And whilst, we shouldn't be pleased that we lost 2 games, ultimately there are much better teams that have fared against Man City much, much worse. So there's baby steps, and look, maybe the progression next season will be to try and get a point off City, try and get a win. There's something we can build on from this season in those performances against the top clubs. It's so often we've gone toe to toe and just lacks the result at the end of it. That's maybe what Fulham can do a bit more of next season.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The performances against the teams above us have been very good, but yeah, we've just lacked in that final third or in decision making. But I think it shows kind of how far Fulham have come under Marco Silva. Obviously, in the Premier League before, under Jokanovic and Parker, we've really struggled, and you always seem to be on the end of a really, really bad result. But we've more than held our own yesterday, and we've more than held our own over the course of the season against these big clubs. And I'm sure we'll get onto a potential penalty decision, but I don't want to ponder on it too much. But so on another day, we definitely could have got a result. And yeah, it just shows just how far we've come. And I think when City look back on the season, if they are to win the league, they'll look on the 6 points they've picked up against Fulham and think that just how important those performances were when they weren't particularly at it, I don't think.
As Jack said, if we look back under previous Premier League seasons, the criticism we've always had is this sort of soft underbelly that Fulham Football Club just tends to have. We, rightly or wrongly, over the past 10 years, we've been labelled as a nice football team. We play attractive football, but really, when push comes to shove in games where you've got to dig in, we've not really had it. And we saw a little bit of it under Parker towards the end of that Premier League season. But Marco has really given us both elements to our game, which I think is so important. We had the grit under Parker and we had the attractive football under Jokanovic, and Marco sort of brought both, which makes a huge difference because it means we can be competitive against top 6 sides, but we can also go out and, put away the teams below us. We look at the games we've had at home in this back end of the season. You look at Forest, you look at Leeds, those sort of games where we just go out and we are the better side. We look the better side and we pick up 3 points. And it's the first time in a long time we've been like that in the Premier League.
Yeah, Adam, it wasn't the perfect start despite us lauding Fulham. And it was just annoying because actually I felt like we just showed City a little bit too much respect in those first couple of minutes, allowed them to get their foot on the ball. I don't know if the belief was maybe not there. And then Fulham did actually start playing once they were 1-0 down. It was almost like we were more comfortable to be behind against City. And I just think that Ream... Look, it's a poor challenge. Alvarez kind of skips away from him well, but it's actually some of the build-up beforehand. Jack Grealish just being allowed way too much time to float that ball into the box. And yeah, that was the only disappointment really from yesterday's game. And Marco said it on his post-match press conference where he's like, well, we basically gave them a head start. And that's annoying because actually the rest of the game, if you didn't give them that head start, who knows what could have happened, because the more Fulham grew into the game, we were quite clearly a bit of a match for City.
I think a lot of the Fulham players probably took the first minute of the game wanting to take photos of Erling Haaland, like most of the crowd were, to be honest. Everyone was like, oh my God, we're playing City. This is amazing. Let's stand back and watch them. And by the time you've done that, they've already got into the box and Ream has already taken out Alvarez. There wasn't even a chance to take in the scintillating football they were playing. We just stood off them way too early. The great thing about that is I'd say if we didn't go a goal down as early as we did, we probably wouldn't have even got a reaction. We would have just seen the same patterns emerging. We would have been sitting back watching it happen. Whereas what we actually were forced to do was say, okay, cool, we've got a game on our hands. We've got nothing to lose. We now need to go and fight for something. And it was much more enjoyable to watch that kind of game rather than watching us hold out for 45 minutes, concede just before half time and then come out and lose 4-5-0. I know which game I would have taken. But when it was after 1 minute, already conceding that penalty, I definitely feared the worst. I thought I was going to be on the end of a Tottenham-style drubbing.
Do you think maybe it was tactical? We talked about in our preview pod, yeah. Sonia said that Fulham shouldn't score too early. Maybe we took that a step further and we're like, right, give City their 1-goal lead and then we'll start to play. So
also, if you calm down Erling Haaland early enough in the game, don't worry, you've got your record-breaking goal. You can now just lay off us a little bit. Maybe that was our idea. Just let him get his goal and then he won't be quite as angry for the rest of the game, because that seemed to work wonders.
Yeah, I could not believe the size of Erling Haaland. Like, obviously, I know that he's big. I've seen him on the telly, but suddenly seeing him live in the flesh on a pitch, he was like a tree. He's just like, what? How are you? Like, he's like something concocted in a laboratory. It's just madness how much he made Tosin look like a borrower. It was crazy.
A lot of their team, genuinely, I've always thought, okay, City look about average size, Haaland looks pretty massive. But it's when they line up next to our team, admittedly, we had some of our smaller players on the pitch, but even Kenny Tete's not the smallest man in the world, but then suddenly next to the rest of the City team, he looks fairly small. And you go through all of our team, and there was a massissive height disadvantage, but it didn't seem to plague us, especially after we were able to bring on Diop to even help that even up that advantage.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing basketball. I'd like to see him have a go, actually. I bet he'd do a few dunks, wouldn't he? Dan, brilliant goal to get us back into it. It's a lovely ball from Andreas Pereira to Harry Wilson, and finished so well by Carlos Vinicius, who actually yesterday, I think, had a 7 or 8 out of 10 performance. I thought that it was definitely his best performance in a white shirt. He just seemed to be a bit more stuck in than usual. Probably should have had a second if he'd managed to get round Ederson. It was actually well done by Ederson in the end. At the time, I was kind of swearing at Carlos Vinicius that he didn't score, and in fairness, Ederson does bloody well to save it. But yeah, going back to that goal, just really nice play all in all. That's a goal that any team would be proud to score, particularly against City.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lovely run by Harry Wilson as well, and the weight of pass from Andreas Pereira is great. And that's the sort of thing that we've wanted from him a lot of the season, and he does have it in his locker. And it's a lovely little knockdown, and it's just that sort of instinctive centre-forward play from Carlos Vinicius. I think that's the benefit. If you can get the best out of a player like Carlos Vinicius, that's what you hold over playing Bobby De Cordova-Reid or Dan James up top, is that actually in the box, you've got a centre-forward who should know what to do in those situations, which is just react, know where the goal is and put his foot through it. And it was really good. He brought it down well, opened up his body well. It's great that it fell on his favoured foot on his left. And it's a really good finish. And I'm happy for him because I'm not his biggest fan, Sammy. I think he's fine, but a lot of the time for me, he leaves a lot to be desired with his hold-up play. But I saw more effort from him against City, which is a big thing. He was chasing down lost causes a bit more. He was throwing himself about. And that's all we can really ask from him. We know, we've been over it so many times, we know he's not Alexander Mitrovic. But yeah, I'd agree. Probably his best. Maybe I think probably he was better against Chelsea in that home game than he was against City. But overall, it's a decent performance from Carlos, and I'm pleasantly surprised because I was a bit disappointed to see him in the starting 11 because I wondered if the way to get at City was to be quick and direct rather than have Carlos sort of holding the ball up. But I think he proved Marco right playing him from the start.
Yeah, no, well done to Carlos, and a really, really nicely taken goal. Jack, it was just a shame, really, because I actually think that Fulham, okay, yes, look, City had chances. Leno did keep us in the game. I thought that goal was going over the bar. From the Hammersmith end, I was all ready to just shout, way, and then it just... People did around me, Sammy. There was a couple of people who genuinely went, way, as it was midair, and then it just nestled, and you're like, oh God, you look like an absolute tit. But I was one of those tits. I was just about to stand up. I was just about to go, and then it just... I've never seen something dip so viciously. I don't know how to say it. Viciously. Anyway, Jack, good goal.
Yeah, very, very good goal from Alvarez. Quite deflating for it to go in. Yeah, the way it dips in at the last minute is absolutely fantastic. The way he gets away from, I think it's Polinia and Tosin both try to put a foot on him, and then he manages to get the ball composed. And then, yeah, the dip on it's just absolutely just mental. And it shows just the quality that City have got. You know, all the praise is always on Erling Haaland, but they play their other striker, Julian Alvarez. And I mean, he's scored 2 against us this season as well. Both of his from open play. And, you know, so yeah, Fulham were playing quite well at that point, and we were in the game when you're thinking, even if it's, you know, about 10 minutes ago, thinking, you know, get to half time, you never know what's going to happen. And for that goal to go in, it was frustrating. But yeah, what a strike, honestly. You can't really blame Bernd Leno. It's an absolutely ridiculous goal.
Yeah. Second half, Adam, I felt like Fulham really had City on the ropes, but then actually I watched Match of the Day thinking there wasn't a hell of a lot of clear-cut chances made. And that's where sometimes I think highlights don't do the game justice, because City really were made to work, and it was only maybe the odd sloppy pass here or there, or just a moment of bad decision making that stopped Fulham getting into the game, really.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely in that game second half, as you say. Chances didn't necessarily show that, but I think what did show it, and I remember saying to my dad when we came out of the game, is that I don't remember City having to time waste against that many teams. Usually they're far and away, but the fact that they had to resort to the tactics of going, we are going to time waste. They got several players with yellow cards at the end, and also the amount of time that they took over every single free kick that was largely in their own half, because we were pressuring them so badly, they really did have to push for that. So we did stretch City. And when we did get through, I still think they got really lucky. If we think about that Walker foul, I'm going to call it exactly what it is, that foul on Bobby Deckwood over Reed. I mean, it's not the first time that he's been caught on camera doing something he shouldn't have done, but I don't know how VAR didn't see that. It's clear as day that he has pulled down Bobby Deckwood over Reed, and I do not know how that wasn't given as a penalty.
Very good. Dan, penalty, not a penalty. It came at, there was almost like a trio of decisions that infuriated the crowd, and it was almost like a crescendo. The first one was Ederson on Vinicius, which we all thought might be a penalty, and quite clearly wasn't. Then there was just a couple of dodgy, I think there was maybe a throw-in that wasn't given the right way, a minute later, and then that decision happened, and the Hammersmith end exploded. It's one of those, I look at the replay, can see why VAR didn't overturn it, but in the ground at that moment, it's a barge. It's not a shoulder. It's not a coming together. It's not a 50-50 in my eyes. Walker has shoved him to the ground. I mean, that's what I think of it. I know that there's a bit of debate online, and some people are saying it's not a penalty. I still just think sometimes the eye test is all you need, and from the Hammersmith end, it just felt like a penalty.
Yeah, because I know AF sits in the Johnny Haynes, but Sammy and Jack, I know you both sit relatively close to me in the Hammy and Jack especially. And I was a bit annoyed because I watched the highlights back and it looked so much more a penalty in real time than it did on the replay. In the Hammy end, I was adamant. I'd never seen a more stonewall penalty. I lost my head completely and rarely do. But then I've seen the replay back and it just annoyingly doesn't look like as much of a penalty as it did at the time. I think it doesn't get overturned either way, which then falls on this whole thing of do 50-50 decisions. Has that gone against us in that situation? I think it has. And it's really hard to get away from the fact that probably gets given as a penalty if it's City. And I do think it's horrible because you feel like that tin hat sort of person sat there, but it really does feel when you play top six teams that these decisions just consistently do seem to go against you, 50-50s across the pitch. It just felt like Fulham weren't getting the decisions. And that's really frustrating because you've already got this massive gulf financially and in terms of just individual quality. You don't also need to have those 50-50 decisions going against you so consistently. And I do think that if that's Julian Alvarez going down in the box at the other end, it gets given. And that's the frustrating thing. Whether I think it's definitely a penalty, I think maybe not. It is just one of those that it doesn't get overturned either way. And it's just frustrating to feel that, it's little old Fulham, so we don't get the decisions, and big old juggernaut City would.
Yeah, Jack?
I think it's a penalty. To be honest with you, he's got both hands on him. He's shoved him down, and I agree. If it's up the other end, it probably is given as a penalty. And you look at someone last night put on Twitter the penalty they got at their place right at the death, and I mean. De Bruyne, I think it was De Bruyne, he goes down like he's been shot and there's like no contact at all. So, yeah, it's frustrating. I don't really like to kind of look things in hindsight and look at, we didn't get this decision, so but that is a penalty. And I remember walking back to Hammersmith with a couple of friends and looking at it and I was just like, that's just so annoying.
Do you know what almost made me angrier, Sammy, as well? Was right after it was when Kenny Tete got wiped out by Jack Grealish. And I cannot understand how it's not a free kick. And I like, AF, you'd have been pretty close to it.
I was loving that.
Yeah, Kenny Tete just got there first and then got clattered by Jack Grealish. And in that moment, it felt, in memory, it felt quite soon after the penalty appeal. I
was waiting for the ball to go out of play. I was thinking when the ball goes out of play, they'll look at that on VAR. So when he got clattered, I was too busy thinking, they'll have a look at that decision back there to kind of realise that Jack Grealish had tried to kill Kenny Tete, which is never a good thing to do. Never a good route to lead yourself down with 20 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, it's like South Park. Who killed Kenny? It seems to happen on a almost weekly basis, really, that someone tries to take him out. I mean, I must admit that there's just sometimes I feel like the eye test does work. I remember thinking the same about the Willian penalty that never got given against Everton, where I was just like, I can see it. I know it's a penalty. You can show me a million replays or whatever afterwards and micro detail it and show me a replay why you think it's not. But sometimes the eyes just don't deceive you, and that's one of those moments. I will caveat that we've had a couple of penalties this year that actually I think we were, we got on the right side of the 50-50. You think back to Mitrovic against Van Dijk. That's actually a decision that normally wouldn't be given against a top six club, and it was. And I was glad that it was, because it was one of those that actually I think a referee could have easily just said, get up. And also the Mitrovic one that he won against Bournemouth as well was actually normally a decision not given. So I will add that I think Fulham have managed to get a couple of penalties that maybe have gone the right way this season. But yeah, I think you are also right that if that was Alvarez or Haaland taken out by Tosin or Diop at the other end, it just feels like that would be given the other way. And maybe because sometimes I wonder if bias comes into it, because you're thinking like Kyle Walker versus Bobby Decordova Reid. Kyle Walker probably won that because he's Kyle Walker. And actually, I think it's a penalty. But yeah, the referee was hounded by the Hammersmith end. I haven't heard an appeal like that in a long time. We should just address the injuries. Terrible luck yesterday to have, one confirmed break, probably a second break. Tim Ream confirmed to have a broken arm. He's going to be out at least for the rest of the season, probably most of the summer as well. Andreas Pereira with a horrible landing on his ankle. There is the replay of it. I wouldn't actually advise watching it because it's pretty grim. I've seen it. His ankle just bends the wrong way, the way that it shouldn't do. Adam, just horrific luck for two players that, funnily enough, are the only two players to have started every league game this season. And now both of them almost certainly won't play again. Marcus Silva must just be bemoaning his luck.
Yeah, he's bemoaning his luck. I think Ream and Pereira are bemoaning their luck because they were probably thinking, do you know what, we'll see out the season, we'll see it as a success all round. They've been in every single game. They've played most of the minutes, all the minutes really. And it's a case that I think for Tim Ream, it was such a big blow to happen early on. And you could see just the way he trudged off. I've seen him trudge off like that last year where he fell on his back and I was thinking that's his season done then. And it's the second time I've had to see him trudge off like this. And I don't like seeing Tim Ream that upset. It just upsets everybody. I hope he's all right. And then with Pereira's injury as well, it was a shame because 10 minutes before that I was thinking, we need to give this guy a rest. He's playing out of his skin and he's playing every single minute. We need to give him a rest. And it seems that decision was taken out of his hands. I think he probably would have been given a rest, but now he's got an extended spell on the sidelines. I hope to see him back, but I do think this will force Fulham's hand in the transfer market quite significantly because he's so relied on for our team. We have a couple of games left to be able to try out some alternatives that are already at the club. But realistically, it's going to force our hand in the transfer window. So could be a positive in that respect, but really hope that it's not as bad as it looks, as you say, Sammy, from those replays. Not good.
Firstly, it's horrible that this happened to both players, but taking like a purely pragmatic view in the same view as the Mitrovic suspension. It's really unlucky for us, but there is an element of luck here that this has happened at a point in the season where we've got nothing left to play for. And I think in a way for Tim Ream, it's not the worst thing in the world because one, he gets a rest, but two, because it's an arm injury. I don't think that hinders him going forward as much as it would have been if he'd done his back again, or if he'd have had what Pereira's happened to, that could have been the end for Tim Ream. We might not have seen him again. But, at least this has happened now at this point in the season. And so whilst we can be, bemoan our luck that we've lost two key players out to likely both breaks, it's actually, this could have happened at a much worse time. But it is gutting for both of them because they have been vital and both of them have had criticism at times. But overall, their contribution this season has been massive. And it's a shame that they won't be here to see out the season.
Yeah. And Jack, Tom Cairney did come on for Andreas Pereira, looked brilliant. And surely, I know Tom Cairney is not a direct Andreas Pereira replacement, but done himself no harm. And you got to give him surely the last 5 games to start and really prove what he's about, Tom Cairney, even if it's in a slightly different way to Andreas. He can't press like Andreas can, but he offers us so much more going forward, just so classy. I thought he was exceptional yesterday and definitely our player of the second half, maybe Bert Leno aside.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I think he's been really good over the course of the season coming off the bench, to be perfectly honest with you. And it'd be a slightly different role to what he's been playing. He's been slightly deeper coming on for Harrison Reed most of the time. But I think he does warrant this run of games actually in the starting lineup because kind of over the course of the season, he's been so good, but because everyone else has been just as good, if not better, he's not got that chance in the 11 that he probably deserves. So it's a shame that it's coming at Andreas Pereira's disposal, but it will be nice that Tom Cairney's going to get a bit of a cameo, even if it is just for these 5 games, because as you said, he was absolutely fantastic yesterday.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking during his summer appearance, I don't know if this is stupid and feel free, any of you, to shout me down, but this vintage of Tom Cairney, this new player that he's moulded into through necessity, because of, the injuries he's had, I couldn't help thinking if he was 25, 26, he would have slotted into that Manchester City team. He would like Pep Guardiola would love this Tom Cairney, but 10 years younger. In the same way that he said it to Ream, I just looked at Cairney and his ability to get out of tight situations, to be press resistant, to pick the right pass. And I thought he just looked so good. And I feel like Pep was watching that and been like, tell you what, he's a player.
I've never seen anybody who can get out of a room, get out of a situation as well as Tom Cairney can. There was a situation where because I noticed with every single time Fulham got the ball, there was already 4 or 5 players, City players already pressing us. When Tom Cairney came on, I think there was one where he basically started juggling it around the Man City midfield. Now, there is not many players in any league in the top European leagues is actually going to be able to do that to Man City. They still had the majority of their main midfield playing, apart from Kevin De Bruyne, and he just walked it round them. So I totally agree with Dan's point. The only thing I would say on that is that I don't think that earlier in his career, when Tom Cairney had a bit more of the legs, he used to be able to do this. So he didn't even think about doing this because he was too busy running forwards. Now he kind of just stops. He sees the whole game. I just hope that he's got the ability to kind of carry on for a couple more years in this role for Fulham because it's vital to how we play.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's also the pairing of particularly Polina and Reed with him means that Tom Cairney doesn't have to do the things that we used to criticise him for, which is his lack of ability to press. Sometimes Tom Cairney just used to allow a midfielder to go past and be like, oh dear. And then more often than not, that player would go and score a goal, which is, I think there's less pressure on him in this system because he knows that Polina and Reed do the running kind of for him, and that allows him. It almost is kind of American football-esque, where get the tight end to deal with that person coming at me, and I'll just quarterback it. Just protect me, and I will do a job for you. So it might be a blessing in disguise, but look, we really wish Tim and Andreas the best and a speedy recoveries in both instances. And if they could get fit for next August, then that would be fantastic. You imagine for Tim, 3 months, broken arm, probably very much doable. Andreas, we'll have to wait and see what the doctor prognosis is. Right, we're going to take a break there. Afterwards, we're going to get in some of your questions. Part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast. Sammy here with Dan, Jack and Adam. Just to say that there is I think honestly less than 10 tickets, fewer than 10 tickets, I should say, left for our live show, which is next Monday, the 8th of May, after the Leicester game. So if you want to come along, there is a link in the description of this podcast. You can also head to the Fulhamish website. There is an article up there with all the links on how to buy a ticket to see Fulhamish live at the Half Moon Putney. We can confirm that our special guest is going to be Reece Parkinson, former radio DJ, still a prolific TV radio presenter. He is awesome. He's been on Fulhamish a couple of times now, and Reece is going to be joining us on stage at the Half Moon. So get your tickets now. We would love to see you there to celebrate the season, have a couple of pints with you. It's going to be after the Leicester game, and yeah, tickets selling fast, almost hopefully going to sell out early next week. So if you haven't grabbed them yet, please do. Right, let's get into loads of your questions. I want to rattle through these guys because, I mean, the questions that we get are always great, but I almost want to ask every single one of these. So we'll try and spend a bit longer than normal rattling through the questions. First one from Marco Silva is Magic at Opinions FC. Bit niche. When was the last time we scored direct from a free kick? We've hit the post like 1 billion times and didn't score any last season from memory. With this in mind, I would love a move for James Ward-Prowse. Unlikely, but I am sure he will leave this summer. Come on, you Whites. Am I wrong in saying that I think it's Joe Bryan in the playoff final?
I think so. I think it might be. I think it might be. I don't think we scored. I don't think we scored any in the COVID. We didn't score any goals in the COVID season, but I don't remember any free kicks. So I think it might be that Joe Bryan one.
God, he is right, Dan. We just do. Andreas Pereira has an amazing ability to almost like crossbar challenge it whenever he takes a free kick. He just sadly never finds the top corner, but we've been so close so many times.
Yeah. And Harry Wilson as well. Where's free kick demon Harry Wilson? I'm gutted. Like, he has brought so much good to this side of the year and nearly 2 years he's been here. But I was so sure he'd rattle off a couple of free kicks for us. And yeah, we've been unlucky, and we've very nearly scored directly from a free kick, in the sense that Manuel Solomon bopped it in, couldn't have missed after Pereira hit the post against Brentford. Yeah. But direct, yeah, we have been unlucky. But I guess it's disappointing, obviously, because everyone loves to see a direct free kick again. But also, there's the positives there, isn't it? That this isn't a Fulham side built on, Niskan Skabano going through his David Beckham era, as I think AF pointed out, at the back end of that COVID season and promotion, where he single-handedly sort of just dragged us upwards with his free kicks.
Mm. No, yeah, it's just one of those, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking the only reliable free kick scorer Fulham have had in the last 10 years is Ross McCormack, really. He loved a free kick, Ross McCormack. It was weird, Ross's free kicks. I never thought they were technically that brilliant. He just always seems to find the back of the net, which obviously is all that's actually required. But yeah, also just a random memory whilst discussing this. I remember when we signed John Arne-Riise, and I really was hoping that John Arne-Riise would score one of those famous free kicks that he did so often for Liverpool. He tried it every single week, and it always just hit the wall or hit the Hammersmith end.
Awful. Absolutely.
Yeah, for a period,
awful.
I'm pretty sure, I don't know if it still runs, but I think he had the most shots without scoring for any Premier League player for a period of time when he was at Fulham. He had a hell of a left foot on him, but he they never went in ever at Fulham.
A seriously underwhelming Fulham signing, wasn't it, John Arne-Riise? We should have just got the hint when he didn't sign for us that time back in Liverpool, because his mum told him that he should sign for Liverpool instead of Fulham. We should have taken the hint then and never gone back. But yeah, be nice to score a direct free kick. Well, Andreas Pereira is not going to be scoring them anytime soon, so maybe it is Niskin's season again now he's back fit. Maybe we can see a Niskin sizzler before the end of the season and break the free kick curse. Rumbledore says, why don't we give some youth players a run out? We've also had a question here from Jay Blankenship, who I met last week at the Aston Villa and the Leeds game. So hello to Jay. It says, with safety secured and our new injuries, does Luke Harris or any other young players get some minutes in these last few games? My dad is also banging this drum. Every time I speak to him on the phone, he's like, why aren't we playing the youngsters? Why aren't we playing Luke Harris? Why aren't we playing that Goddo guy that was the only player to come out of Crawley with some credit? It is true, Dan, that I wouldn't mind seeing a bit more of at least one young player before the end of the season.
Yeah, I think Luke Harris. I think that feels like a no-brainer to me. I think it will happen. He won't come into the starting 11, but there's now a spot on the bench which has reopened up for him since when Kearney was injured, Luke Harris was on the bench, and obviously he came back and that pushed Harris out. I think he'll feature. I'm pretty certain of that. I wouldn't mind, again, with Tim Ream's injury, I wouldn't mind now seeing Charlie Robinson make an appearance on the bench again. I think he's done it once this season, maybe twice. It's an opportunity for him as a player I like. He's a tall, physical centre-back, but pretty comfortable in possession when I've seen him. I like Charlie Robinson. I know Peter Rutzler's a big fan of Charlie as well. So I think those are two players that I would like to see. Harris, I think, will definitely happen. We may see Charlie Robinson come in. As much as we love the cult hero that is Shane Duffy, there is absolutely zero point in him playing any football for the next 5 games. I know that feels harsh, and we love him because he's Shane Duffy, but if he's going to be on the bench, you may as well just play Charlie Robinson, because it doesn't matter what we do, and Shane Duffy isn't going to be here after 5 games. So you may as well get someone through the academy through, in my opinion. I don't know if that's ridiculous, but...
Well, I think that's what my dad was making the point, Jack. He said previous seasons, I don't know if the club's made this excuse or if the fans have made this excuse for the club, but it's always been said, well, because we're going for promotion or we're fighting relegation, we can't play the youngsters. It's too risky to play all these youngsters when our lives on the line. And then suddenly it seems like, well, our lives aren't on the line for the first time in 6 years, and we're still just not giving anyone a run out. But what I've been saying back to my dad is I don't think Marco Silva sees it this way that maybe us or the media do, that there's nothing on the line. They want to reach a record points total. There's £2 million-ish for every place you rise in the Premier League. There's nothing on the line here.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that's the main point. Marco Silva said a few times in his pressers that they want to break that points total, and we're not a million miles away from it with some favourable games. We could still do it. So maybe he's thinking about that and not thinking about potential youngsters. I think Luke Harris is the banker. I think he will feature at some point, especially now the Pereira injury, and maybe obviously we've talked about Tom Kearney, but he's not necessarily a like for like replacement for Andreas Pereira. So maybe Luke Harris gets some minutes there. And obviously there's others. There's Robinson, there's Godot, there's that Callum McFarlane as well who could potentially get a bench appearance. But I'd like to maybe see some more included in the youth. But I mean, if you're offering me that or we break our record points total, I'm going to pick the record points total.
Yeah, I think it's hard to underestimate as well what an extra 2 million, an extra place in the Premier League means. I mean, look, we've been talking about ticket prices and the impact of, does this money matter and stuff like that. And when there's a free £2 million on the table to finish a place higher in the league or the division or whatever, or avoid finishing one place below, Palace are a bit of a juggernaut at the moment. They could take our 10th spot if we're not careful, particularly in that game that we got against them in a few weeks. And I think that just playing a team full of youngsters is never going to happen. But I think you're both right. Luke Harris makes sense. Maybe someone else in that final United game, especially if a place is absolutely secured. If we can't move out of 10th spot, particularly on that final day, then that absolutely surely is a time to see a couple of youngsters. But I think until something like that happens, where it's mathematically impossible for us to change positions or something, then I think we'll probably keep it how it is for now. Justin asks, I'll go to you on this one, Adam. With Ream out for the season, we'll see Diop and Tosin together. My question is, who should be the left centre-back? I thought Diop performed well there versus City, but I thought some of his left-footed passing, especially long range, left a lot to be desired. Thoughts? I'd caveat with saying that I'd like to see maybe Diop playing there when it's not against a team with the intensity of Manchester City. Your passes have to be 100% perfect against City, and they don't always have to be against other teams in the Premier League.
For sure. I think actually probably the main reason that Diop ended up playing left centre-back in that game was because I didn't want to disrupt it twice with the fact that Tim going off. They probably went, okay, let's do a like for like and put Diop in there rather than Tosin moving position and then putting Diop in on the right. It just would have disrupted the back four even more than that. You're totally right. In fact, he was pressured so much with his passing, probably more than Tosin was. Tosin seemed to feel like he had more time. I think he just naturally seems calmer than he was earlier in the season. But I would like to see it continue with Tosin on the right-hand side and Diop on the left. The only thing that I would say on this is that when we've seen them both play together, it's not clear which one should take up that berth. I think that they need to be given time to say, okay, this is Marco's decision and he's going to stick with it. Whereas what we used to have was one coming in for Ream, one coming in for Tosin, and them kind of swapping and changing a little bit. I think having these games, as we said, as bad as it was for Tim Ream having that injury, having those games to really settle in a partnership will get Marco the answers he needs as to, is this the long-term partnership going forward, or do we need to sign a left centre-back to replace Tim Ream? Can Diop or Tosin look to fill that gap? Sorry, I haven't answered the question fully there, but I think it's more Marco's decision because I don't know who is the better left centre-back out of them, if either of them are.
Just to follow up on AF, I think what Diop was doing at West Ham when we signed him was he was actually playing at left centre-back. And I think that the thought process actually was originally that despite being right-footed, Diop is a player comfortable playing on the left-hand side. And that's where he used to play for West Ham. So I think that's likely what will happen. Long-term, will it work? I think these next 5 games are a great indicator of that. But I think it will likely be Diop on the left. But I do completely agree with I forgot who's writing the question in, but I completely agree with their point that there are negatives. There's a drawback to playing a right-footed player at left centre-back, especially if their left foot's not great, because you do cut down those passing lanes. If you're, Harry Maguire, I think, is a perfect example of a player who plays at left centre-back, but often gets himself into trouble because he loses his passing options when he has to use his left foot. So I think it would be Diop, but it will be interesting to see over these next 5 games. It's a good tester for next season, right? This is an interesting point to see play out over these next 5 games.
Yeah, and that left-footed pass that Tim Ream makes to Anthony Robinson so much. It's a weird technique he has on it. It kind of curls towards Anthony Robinson and he plays that ball so much. And you wonder now if maybe our left-hand side will struggle a little bit because Ream and Robinson have just got that amazing understanding between each other. So it'd be interesting to see if Diop, if he is the left centre-back, which I agree with you, Dan, I think he will be. And I always did feel like Diop was he had to adapt to playing right centre-back when he played with Tim Ream. And we all thought this might be the partnership that would play this season. But obviously Tim's performances have managed to keep him in the team. It's another tiny silver lining. Obviously wouldn't have wanted Tim to break his arm to the last 5 games. Marco Silva's hand is forced now in order to experiment for these last 5 games and see if this is a long-term partnership or if we're going to have to invest in another kind of first choice centre-back in the summer, which you imagine Fulham will at least look at that option come the window. This next question, I've got 2 kind of similar questions. One's from FFC Dom, the other's from at It's Only Fulham. Is Leno better than Areola was? Areola was brilliant, but Leno is just unbelievable. Although he says, I realise there might be a slight bias because we never saw Areola in person. At It's Only Fulham said, could Leno be on track to be the best keeper to ever wear a Fulham shirt? Jack, Leno he's crept up on us through the season. And yesterday was just formidable. He's probably doing his old side, trying to do his old side a little bit of a favour yesterday with some of his saves. He's definitely played his part. I think at the moment, Leno might be pushing Schwarzer for that kind of legendary Fulham keeper status. I think he's going to have to go some to eclipse Van der Sar in my elements of all-time Fulham goalkeepers. But, a couple more seasons and he might get there.
Yeah, Bernd Leno has just been absolutely fantastic over the course of the season. Obviously, neutral perspective, people will look at player of the season for Fulham and the first name that everyone will go to is João Palhinha, and fair enough, he's been absolutely fantastic. But Bernd Leno, for me, I think you could make the argument he's been just as, if not more important than João Palhinha. He's been absolutely phenomenal. The amount of times he's with his saves, and even when we were on that run after the World Cup where we were singing about going on the European tour, you look at Leicester away, you look at Brighton away, those points, obviously we had to score the goals that we did, but those points, a lot of them are down to Bernd Leno. And I think back on the Leno and Areola thing, obviously there is a little bit of bias towards Leno because you saw him play. Areola was obviously during the COVID season, and maybe it's down to the team that Areola was playing in. But Areola kind of reminded me he would save us, he would keep us in games, whereas Bernd Leno is winning us games. So for that, I think that Bernd Leno probably edges Areola for me. And then in terms of the Mark Schwarzer one, I agree. He's creeping up on him, but I think because of the longevity of Mark Schwarzer, I think at the moment he's there. Both obviously were really cheap signings, but who knows? Bernd Leno in the future, we could be talking up there with Van der Sar. Who knows?
Adam, I know you did some stats.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. These two are absolutely incredible goalkeepers in their own right, but picking between them is like trying to pick one of your favourite Avengers. They're both pretty good, both a solid pair of hands or gloves. But really, I looked at the matches between them, and you've got 132. This is Premier League matches. You've got 132 for Leno, 44 for Areola. So I've adjusted some of these stats to make up for that. But save success is about 4% better for Leno in the Premier League. Save per match is about 0.3 better per game, which is, again, another good stat. But this is where I think Leno really comes out on top. And it's actually the number of sweeps per match. You're expecting around 18 sweeps from Leno, even in a single match, which is fairly ridiculous. And you can see how much of a difference that makes when it comes to those one-on-ones with Haaland. He's consistently sweeping, but he's also, as soon as he gets that ball, he's the first to kind of look for an attack. I think for me, that would be the main difference between Areola and Leno. Maybe, again, as Jack said, it's due to the team that he was in. I wouldn't exactly be looking forward in Parker's team thinking, I'm going to hit them on the break. But I think Leno is always, even against Manchester City, the top side really in this division. He's already looking at how he can start an attack there after he's swept up the ball. So it's not only saving us on several different occasions, but it's also trying to get us up the other end of the pitch rather than just, kicking it long. On the discussion around, is he our best ever goalkeeper? We're going to need a couple more years to even get to discussing that one. As you say, Van der Sar is so high up there. But isn't it great that Fulham have been blessed with some of these world-class goalkeeping talents? I don't think that many clubs would be able to say that they've had high caliber goalkeepers that consistently in their team for the last 20 years.
Agreed. I think one thing is that is as a result of us having to watch Gabor Kiraly. I think that's only fair enough that we've had the other goalkeepers around it. But the other thing I wanted to say, just to maybe tie it off, is that I don't know if it's that ridiculous to say, but I think Bernd Leno's probably had a better season than Aaron Ramsdale's had, which I think is interesting. He's definitely been a better shot stopper. Statistically, he has been. Distribution-wise, that's where, Arteta hung his hat, is that Ramsdale, out in possession with the ball at his feet is better, and that's probably true. However, I wouldn't say that Leno's distribution has been poor this season. I feel pretty comfortable with him possession. Marco trusts him. We still build through him. We still play out from the back. And after Aaron Ramsdale gave the ball straight to Carlos Alcaraz a couple of weeks ago, he's not infallible. So I think it's interesting to see that maybe we've actually ended up with the better goalkeeper of the pair right now. Now, Aaron Ramsdale's obviously younger and he's got more room to grow. But in terms of benefiting this season, I think we've come out on the right end of that, which is incredible.
Yeah, I still think one of the signings of the summer. If you look even in the whole Premier League, it was an outstanding bit of business from Fulham, and so happy that Bernd had his chant as well. And there was lots of opportunities to sing it yesterday because I think he was kind of the star of the show, particularly in the first half. And so unlucky not to save that penalty. That's the next thing I think Bernd needs is, can you save a big penalty? Because he's been so close so many times. And imagine in the Hammersmith end if he'd have managed to keep out that Haaland penalty, it would have absolutely erupted. And he got a small hand to it, didn't he? But it was just so much pace on it from Erling Haaland. It was almost unsavable, really, when it was in the corner. This one from Fulham Catalonia says, is Silva hiding Solomon in order to keep other sides away from him this summer and be able to sign him? Very cynical there from our friend over in Catalan. Dan, I feel like Mana Solomon's performances have been on the wane a little bit. I don't know, it's a bit harsh to judge him like this, but I don't know, has he been a little bit found out? Is he, I don't want to call him a one-trick pony, but it's bordering on Pavel Pogrebniak kind of levels of just like unbelievable start and then actually, is he everything that we thought he was? I don't want to write him off at all. Like he's been given about 10 minutes to come off the bench in every game, and Willian's kind of kept him out of the team. But there has been a couple of performances of late which are like, okay, at one point I genuinely thought you were going to be the next Robin van Persie, and now I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was pretty miffed for a few weeks that Marco wasn't giving Manuel more of a chance, especially after that February that he had. But then actually looking at his performances against Villa, obviously he was thrown into the starting 11, not expecting to start, but as Marco said, he was ready. He was in the squad, he was ready to play. And then his cameo yesterday, it's actually, I've actually sort of changed my mind on it. I think it seems to be justified that Marco hasn't used him very much. And I don't think it's anything sinister. I just think it's that he's not currently at the level needed. And that's surprising because he looked unbelievable for that period of time. And I don't know if, obviously every player goes through form, and I hope he's not just a flash in the pan. He had that run of games where he looked immense, because I think there were elements to his technical ability where you're like, this guy can really play football. But I think it's been justified, Marco not playing him, because he hasn't been as good as Willian over the past 2 months. And the other thing is that yesterday was the first time, and maybe a little bit of it as well, where I started to question, and I don't know if this is harsh, Manuel's sort of attitude at the moment. He came on yesterday and he looked sulky. He looked a bit pissed off. He miscontrolled one inexplicably that went out for a throw in, and he sort of just pointed down at the pitch and threw his hands up in the air. He got sent, a ball went through for him to chase through on goal. It was too heavy, but he just gave up on it straight away. He didn't bother chasing it down. It meant that Ederson could have the ball at his feet for 10, 15 seconds because Manuel didn't want to put in that effort, and despite the fact that he'd only just come on the pitch. And so I'm a little bit worried attitude-wise, whether it's that he's annoyed that he's not playing, and if that's the case, well, then he should be doing more to prove why he should be playing. And then two, is it because that's it for him? He's not going to be here next season, and I'm starting to wonder whether that might actually be the case, that this is it for Manuel, that he's either got another club in mind or we've decided that, he's not the player for us. But I wouldn't be surprised if the next 5 games are the last games that he has for Fulham.
For me, it screams he's genuinely trying to avoid an ankle injury at every single 50-50. There was quite a few examples against Villa where I was just thinking, do you know what? If you know that you're going to be either, especially since we've brought him back through his recovery, I hope this isn't the case. But you just saw him bottle a couple of 50-50 challenges, and I was just thinking, I wouldn't expect, someone who's going to be here next season to be bottling out of those. The other thing as well is that when he has started to look a little bit sulky, there's a number one remedy for that one. And it's just, I don't think Marco even worries that much if players are trying their best, but not actually coming off for them. We've seen that with Andreas Pereira. He's had a few off games, but because he's always been giving 100%, you don't ever see him drop out of the team for that reason. I think seeing with Manuel, I would really like to see a change in attitude if he is going to prove that he should be here next season. But for me, it's just screaming avoiding injury to get his next big move.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it is just a patch of form and that he can get a goal. I still wouldn't mind seeing him in that up front role as well, particularly maybe the away game that's coming up at Liverpool, which we'll discuss after the break. But especially with the performances of Dan James in the last couple, which brings me on to Alani's point, saying how crap must Everton have been to make Dan James look like a competent footballer, which is a bit harsh, Jack. But I actually thought that sub didn't work yesterday. Harry Wilson coming off for Dan James kind of killed some of the momentum that we had. I thought a couple of those changes made sense. Maybe the Solomon for Bobby Decordova-Reid made sense in theory, but that was the moment actually where I knew the game was up yesterday. Just I felt like that change, coupled with Bernardo Silva coming on and really controlling that midfield, kind of that last 10 minutes, I actually wasn't confident that Fulham were going to get back into the match. I thought the game was up after that point.
Yeah, the game really did fizzle out. I will say, I do think it's a bit harsh on Dan James. I don't think we necessarily played to his strengths yesterday when he came on. Obviously, against Everton, he got his goal because we played the ball over the top and then he controlled it and whatnot. And every time that, for me anyway, every time that we got the ball and there was the option just to play it over the top, see if Dan James can get the better of the City defence, they would wait for Dan James to come short, and then obviously then you're relying on his technical ability, which isn't as strong as other members of the squad. So yeah, as a sub, it didn't make sense in terms of just why we were playing the way we were playing with him. I would have liked to just a couple of times just play a ball over, just see what happens. We weren't creating anything anyway. The game was really starting to fizzle out, so there'd have been no shame in just punting one and just hoping that he can get on the end of it.
Yeah, 100%. It was just, I don't think Dan James plays that late sub cameo role well. I think that's when we've seen the worst of Dan James. And obviously the absolute nadir was the Southampton game where he came on and just almost couldn't control the ball. I think if you're going to play Dan James, play him in that role. I think, look, he had one game against Everton where he was brilliant. He struggled against Villa, but a lot of teams have struggled to make an impact against Villa because they're fantastic defensively. I don't know. I think maybe the last couple of performances have put to bed some of the slightly overreactionary should we sign Dan James chat, which, you know, it was one game. It was amazing. We all loved it. But I think we've quite clearly proven that is not a sensible use of Fulham's money. And look, if Leeds go down, which it looks very, very likely that they will, I imagine that Dan James is the kind of player that Leeds might want or need to keep in the Championship. He'd probably do absolute bits in the Championship if he was given a run of games, especially with that pace. Final question from Fulham Fan News at Fulham Transfer, who says, assume with Pereira's unfortunate injury that rumours of him leaving will now be over. If it's a broken ankle, as reports in Brazil are saying, he's looking at 5 months out. So who will play as the 10 going forward? I mean, we kind of discussed that, but Adam, yeah, I mean, that probably will impact Pereira being able to move this summer, which has been heavily linked, and it's still a transfer that I've been a bit like miffed as to. I'm mad, kind of surprised that was ever on the cards anyway.
I feel like even if he's using us as a stepping stone, we've seen plenty of players do that. It's very rare unless you absolutely set a league on fire that you're able to do that for one season only. Let alone now he's got that obviously injury that it pretty much scuppers any move unless someone's really banking on him for the long term. But it's not going to be one of the top clubs that's going to come in for an injured player at that point in time. I'd like to think that some of those stories were a little bit fake. I've seen some interviews with him where he really did seem to say he just wanted to find a home for a little bit of time. A lot of players do say that, but it's amazing how many players do find a home at Fulham and say, okay, this is where I'm meant to be for a little while. They like living in London. And until he sets a league on fire, he's not really going to go anywhere. In terms of who's going to look at playing that number 10 role, we touched on it earlier with the idea of Tom Kearney being there. That's my ideal scenario. I don't think he's not going to be able to play 90 minutes. We know that anyway. So even if he starts in the 10 role, you're likely to see someone like Luke Harris come on to probably play that role for most of the sub appearances, but there's no reason that you couldn't have Harry Wilson playing that role. He's played it exceptionally well in the past, and I'd actually love to see him get a go there. We've seen Bobby try and play that, and I think he can play absolutely fine, but I'd actually be looking towards next season thinking, okay, if we're going to bring in a couple of wingers, we're a bit light in that position. Could Harry Wilson do a job here as well? Rather than trying to shoehorn someone in there, let's try and see if we can actually stick with what's going to be here next season.
Yeah, although I'd like to see Bobby in that role. Let him cook. Let him have a little role in the number 10. I've always wanted to see if Bobby at number 10 behind Mitrovic. I always think that was something that we've never really seen happen, and I'm always thinking like that could work so well. Imagine the knockdowns that Bobby could get. Maybe it's just the Mike Bassett in me that just wants Fulham to play 4-4-2. That wants that to happen. Pining for the Zamora and Gira days, basically. I think that screams of. That'll do for the questions today. Thank you so much, and brilliant questions in there today. So that was excellent. Right, we're going to take a short break. Afterwards, we're going to look ahead to Liverpool. Part 3 of the Fulhamish podcast. Sammy still here with Dan, Adam and Jack. Let's look ahead then to Liverpool on Wednesday, our final midweek game of the season, unless you count Leicester on Bank Holiday Monday as a midweek game. No, it's not a midweek game, is it? It's 8 o'clock kickoff up at Anfield. This is a game that should have been played about 6 weeks ago because Fulham were in the FA Cup quarter-final. In hindsight, I think we'd all just rather had a trip to Liverpool than that fateful day. And Dan, this is a more difficult game than I was expecting. I still have it in my head that Liverpool are a bit all over the place, but actually you look at their recent form, 4 wins in a row, 6-1 away at Leeds. They beat Forest 3-2. They beat West Ham 2-1, and they beat Spurs yesterday, an incredible game, 4-3. Looked like they'd thrown away a 3-goal lead, and then Diogo Jota won it in the dying minutes. Annoying that I left the pub on 91 minutes yesterday. That was a mistake. Missed the best part of the game, quite frustratingly. But I think there's something to be said in all of those wins that Liverpool have picked up that, yeah, they've managed to get across the line, but they are conceding goals. And I still think this Liverpool team can be got at.
Oh, for sure. Like this is a great opportunity to get something out of a game at Anfield, which doesn't come around very often, especially not in recent seasons, as Liverpool have hit seriously great levels under Klopp, and this has been their worst season in a while. But they are back to an extent. They're not the Liverpool that they have been under Klopp, but they've got goals back in their side. You've got Diogo Jota, who's come back in and has been fantastic since coming back from injury. And I'm glad, because I really do like Diogo Jota. I think he's a very good footballer and probably not underrated, but in a sense, maybe not held to the levels that he should be, because he's maybe not the most exciting of footballers, but he's very good in front of goal and he's a very calm, intelligent player. And then you've got Luis Diaz coming back as well, which is, he's another fantastic player. You've got Salah in there as well. But defensively, they're there to be got at. There are chances against this Liverpool side. This is a different Virgil van Dijk. He is not at the level that we have seen Van Dijk at in previous years, and that's the injury most likely. It's tough to recover from those things. And they've struggled when your teams have run at them and tried to get in behind them. Van Dijk doesn't have that pace anymore. We all know that Trent's maybe not the most defensively brilliant right back, and this shift of him playing more centrally has worked well, but it's meant that there are chances to be created. And I think this is a game that probably, I feel bad saying it after he scored against City, but maybe it's where you shift Vinny out and we go back to playing Dan James, Manor Solomon, Bobby, someone up top that will allow us to stretch this Liverpool team a little bit. And there's definitely something there. Am I expecting anything? No, probably not, because I think Liverpool are still really hunting for something now. They can smell European qualification. They can smell potential chances to nip in, but it's a chance, and not often do you get to say that recently at Anfield.
Yeah, Jack, it feels like certainly that Fulham can go there and just upset the apple cart a little bit. I think if a team like Forest is going there and scoring a couple of goals, then I can see Fulham scoring at Anfield, and that's exciting. And it's going to be such a different lineup, because we've already talked about the injuries, but you've already got 2 enforced changes to this lineup. But yeah, I just have this weird feeling going into the game that we might spoil the party a little bit, even if we eventually lose.
Yeah, it's not the worst shout in the world to suggest that we're going to go there and get a result. Obviously, going forward, they've got absolute quality and abundance. And I think the reason why they've got over the line is purely just because they've got just so many good players going forward. But as mentioned already, defensively, they're not particularly great. I think in midfield is where they've been lacking for quite a while. The midfield three, I know Trent sometimes drops in, but the midfield three against Tottenham was Fabinho, Curtis Jones, and of course, Harvey Elliott. And I think if they're going to line up with something along those lines, Fulham can very much compete in that midfield battle and have a fair chunk of the ball. It's then just down to whichever, attacking four, if you will, we go with to see if we're gonna create anything. With obviously with the injuries that we've got, it might be a little bit similar to Villa in terms of we struggle to create chances, but there's nothing to suggest that on the counter, as you mentioned, if we played someone like Dan James, that we won't create chances and we won't score goals. And obviously Liverpool are scoring for fun, but we've already talked about how fantastic Bernd Leno was on the weekend, so there's nothing to suggest that he's not going to be at it again.
It's funny as well, because I think that there's something that stood out to me after the Spurs game, is that Klopp, it's not the first time he said this. He had a criticism about us, I think under Scott Parker, when we got a 1-1 draw at home, where he has this real anger towards teams that play a little bit industrially against them, that try and sit in and hit them on the counter-attack, because I think philosophically it's a style that he doesn't agree with. And he had a go at Ryan Mason for playing just counter-attacking football when you've got such a great squad of players. And when we got a 1-1 draw against them, he said something along the lines of, they just played long ball football. And it's clear that I think this is a level of almost kryptonite to this Liverpool side. If you try and go toe-to-toe with them, in general, I think you're probably going to struggle. Maybe not so much this season, but in general, it's difficult to battle against Liverpool's energy that they've got. But he clearly doesn't like it when teams play a little bit ugly, a bit rigid, and try and hit them on the counter, because I think fundamentally he doesn't like teams playing like that against him, because it does expose them at times.
Yeah, I'm a bit annoyed that Diogo Jota will be available for this one. I thought that was an absolute stonewall red card for the high boot against Oliver Skipp. How that isn't given as a red card, Adam, I have no idea.
He's literally cut his head. He's come off and he's gone, okay, and it wasn't like Oliver Skipp was massively ducking down. He's a 6-foot lad, probably ducking down, half a foot?
Yeah.
If Diogo Jota can get his foot up there as well, it's a high foot. If it's a particularly tall player, okay, we'd have a chat about it, but it's not. He's volleyed him in the head and still available for this game. But we've been on the end of players who probably shouldn't be available scoring against us, and I probably have no doubt that we'll be on the end of that on Wednesday.
Yeah, it was a poor decision, and I think, like, I was watching Match of the Day and Klopp was like, yeah, well, did you see Ollie Skipp's penalty? And you were like, well, yeah, I know that should have been a red card as well. That doesn't mean that Diogo Jota is justified. Yeah, that's it's a tricky one really to get right. Adam, in terms of Fulham, who do you think will start in this one?
I'll probably see, I think the goalkeeper's probably a little bit nailed on. Probably see Kenny Tese line up at right back. I don't think that you'd switch that one with enough of the back four already changing. You'll see Tosin, Diop. We have no replacement for Anthony Robinson as much as I'd like to see one potentially at that point in the game. We'll probably line up with Paulinho and Reed in the middle with Tom Kearney in front of them. I then expect to see Bobby Deckwood over Reed, Wilson, and I still think Vinny keeps his place. My reasoning for that is because in the same way that Dan James kept his place, well, eventually after the game that he had to miss against Leeds, he kind of came back in. I still feel that will happen with Vinny, especially after he's gone and scored that goal. He should be high on confidence. If we play off Vinny in the right way and that we have Wilson and Bobby Deckwood over Reed on the wings around him, we should still be able to cause enough problems. But then it does also restrict us to Dan James being that kind of impact sub, which we know he doesn't play well. So maybe we just don't see Dan James. I won't be too unhappy.
Jack, any alterations from Adam's lineup?
I think the only thing I would maybe go with is Dan James, because I think we're going to be more likely to go on the counter-attack. It does feel harsh on Vinny, but I just think if you try and have him jostling with the likes of Van Dijk, we might struggle to create. And we saw when we didn't have much of the ball away at Villa, when Vinicius came on, he was pretty poor. In terms of his hold-up play and bring his others in. So I would bring Dan James in, and fingers crossed that Anfield have got a dry pitch like we did in August.
God, that feels like light years ago that game happened at the beginning of the season. Proof that Fulham can definitely go toe-to-toe with this Liverpool side. How things have changed. We went into that match being like, please don't batter us 5-0. Now we're like, yeah, we can go win at Anfield. Why not? We haven't even got Mitrovic or Pereira or Tim Ream. We're going to go there and win. How things have rapidly changed since August and the expectations, etc. Right, that's already been pretty long for a podcast today, but hope you've enjoyed the bumper kind of extra 15 minutes than usual. Adam, what would you like to go with as today's podcast name?
I think we're going to have to go with Sticks and Stones for this one.
Lovely. Very good. Very apt. All right. Thank you very much for my guest today, Dan Cook. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Sammy.
Jack Stroudley, thank you.
Cheers, mate.
And Adam, thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. Cheers.
We'll be back with the Thursday Club. We'll try and get it out on Thursday. Myself and Coops are going to Liverpool, so we're going to record it from the beautiful city in Merseyside. So it should be out at some point on Thursday. And then, of course, this time next week, it's the Fulhamish Live after Leicester. So have a lovely start to your week, whatever you're doing. And we'll see if we can get another famous win up at Anfield. Come on, you Whites.